Speaker, thank you for the floor. What I'm going to talk about is three things. First, I'm going to talk about social acceptance, social stability, stuff like that. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the acceptance of new migrants and how the fact that you interact with these migrants that are already there also increases the likelihood that communities are going to accept new migrants when they come. Lastly, I'm going to talk about equal chances and how the government simply has a moral imperative in this case to ensure that every person, regardless of his or her ethnicity, gets the same chance in society. But first, some rebuttal. They said, yeah, the state should not treat people differently, like according to their ethnicity. We say, well, that's only true if it's not a relevant criterion, first of all. And secondly, we say, even if it is not a relevant criterion in every single case, then if, like, the majority of the cases, it is a very relevant criterion, we say we can still do it. We may do, like, a little harm in some cases, but we see a huge problem with a huge majority of those migrants, and therefore we think that that still is a good choice. And they say, well, you stigmatize these people by essentially showing that they are incapable of getting along in society by themselves. We say no, the current outcome of the fact that they do not get along in society for the most part, that is what stigmatizes, not the fact that we are helping them to actually achieve something. Then they said, basically said, well, it's a valid choice to do this, because, you know, you have the security and stuff like that. First of all, we say, well, it's not always a real choice, right? Most of the times, these migrants simply cannot afford living anywhere because the house prices are so low in these areas. We say by spreading them, we also think that housing will become more readily available for these people in other parts of the city. But secondly, even if it is a choice you can make as an individual, we still think that you have to consider the effect it has on your children and on the society as a whole. We think there's third-party harm in sheltering yourself from the rest of society, and therefore we can still ban it because it hurts society. Then they say, well, it's painful to integrate, so if you feel more at home, then for some reason you will integrate better. We say no. The fact that you live in a community where there are only people like you allows you to evade responsibility, essentially. You see only people who speak no German. You see only people who did not integrate, and therefore you come to see of that as something that is normal. We say, we want to show these people that it's absolutely not normal not to speak the language. Moreover, we want to make sure that they can only function in their neighborhood by learning the language and learning the customs, so that they can be better off under that situation. Okay, my first one. We see that when people interact, they are more willing to accept each other, right? If you encounter migrants, so this is from a non-migrant perspective, as well as from a migrant perspective, if you interact with people from the other sort more often, right? If you see them more, if you talk to them more, then you're more willing to accept things that you experience as a burden. So you already talked about one thing, right? The willingness to accept, for instance, that you have to pay for social welfare for them. But moreover, for instance, you're more willing to accept as a non-migrant, for instance, culturally specific phenomena, such as them building mosques in your city, such as them doing things that you think are a little crazy. But if you know these guys and you think, well, they're actually really nice people, you're much more willing to accept those things, and therefore you're going to be able to live with them peacefully far more. No. Then secondly, from the point of view of migrants, they are going to be willing to accept our society and even the rules that under their cultural experience are a bit strange more if they like us more, if they interact with us more, if they see that we're really nice people. So for instance, what we see in the UK is that because like large Muslim minorities were allowed to live in sort of seclusion of the rest of society, they actually wanted their own Sharia courts because they didn't accept the judicial system of the UK in and in itself. Secondly, we say that there's a huge problem usually with criminality among migrants, at least in some groups, and the reason for that often is that they essentially dehumanize the non-migrants, that they see them as necessarily rich, arrogant and hostile to them, and therefore that it is okay to steal from them. We say also this problem can be greatly solved by giving a more humane face to non-migrants, by mixing these people together in these societies.
You should show us why immigrants, when they are forced to live with out-group members from their perspective, will interact with them and not will...
Well, it's quite simple. You walk out on the street and you meet people who are not completely like you. You have to interact with your neighbors because you have interest in what your neighbor does. I mean, it's quite simple. You go to school in your neighborhood, you meet children who live in your neighborhood. It's simple as that. Okay, then secondly, the acceptance of new migrants. We say the scarce interaction that non-migrants have with migrants enables lots of politicians and other people who have a vested interest in scaring the hell out of people to portraying migrants as basically a hostile group of people towards non-migrants. We say, when you know that, like, the guy they are talking about is actually similar to the guy who's living next to you, who you really like, you're much more willing to accept that they are actually normal people, and that when this politician pops up and tells you we should have no more migrants, or we should, like, kick them back to their own countries, you're not going to be willing to accept that either. And we say we also want to allow for new migration in the future for two reasons. First of all, because the current migrants have a vested interest in, like, getting their families here occasionally, and secondly, we think that in the future we're simply going to need more migrants for our economy because we do not have enough workers otherwise. Then, lastly, equal chances. We say the fact that you are born as a Turk or some other ethnicity should not determine the outcome of your life. So you should still have the same opportunity as any other person born in that country to lead a fulfilling life. Because it's not your doing that you were born in a certain minority. So why is the neighborhood so important? Well, first of all, you go to school in a certain neighborhood, right? The quality of schools is often very much dependent on the people that live there. We think that usually schools in migrant areas are simply of lower quality, what we see at the moment. But secondly, the place where you live, the neighborhood where you live, determines what kind of friends you have, what kind of social network you have, what kind of connections you have that could get you anywhere in life. It determines whether you are friends with somebody who, like, delivers pizza the rest of his life, or the CEO of a big company that could actually help you out in your further life. But most importantly, it determines your aspirations and your perception of what is normal as a career and as choices later on in your life. So we see that ethnic minorities are less likely to go to college at the moment, simply because it is not expected of them from their cultural background, from the people they know, from the people they meet, because they see nobody who is a professor or a doctor or something like that, and they come to see it actually not only as being strange, but actually as being against their own culture, right? This is what we see in the US, where black kids who go to college are called acting white, because the perception is that that is not how you should treat yourself when you are in such a minority. For these reasons, we're back to